Good evening and welcome to Widowed and Young. I'm Shalini Lucas and I'm one of the ambassadors for Way. And this is part of 25 Tuesdays, our Instagram live series, where we're marking 25 years of this fantastic charity, Widowed and Young. Today I have the pleasure of speaking to Claire Mercer. I'm just going to ask Claire to join. And as she joins, I'll just say that Claire is a campaigner for smart motorways, the dangers of smart motorways, after her husband Jason was killed in a car accident in June 2019. And it's a particularly poignant this month, as I believe it's National Road Victims Month, but I'm sure Claire's going to tell us a lot more. Welcome, Claire.
Hiya.
I said this to you before, I love your hair, and I think it's matching my shawl today.
Yeah, I can do that. I changed my hair colour to match what I'm wearing.
Fantastic. Yeah, why not? Why not? And Claire, you're very kindly joining us this month. I believe it's National Road Victims Month. Is that correct?
Yes, yeah. But obviously, it's like many dangers. It's happening all the time, every time, wherever. But why make a dangerous situation a lot worse with these smart motorways? So, and
Okay.
still, like you said yourself, you don't know what one is.
No, and I don't until I read everything about you and smart motorways, and I've said this before, I've driven all over England and Wales and I just never even knew what it was. And I really have driven because of my work. So we're gonna come to that. But first, Claire, tell us a little bit about Jason. How did you meet? How long were you together? And what was he like?
He walked up to me in a pub and said, "I know you," and apparently he did. I'd not spotted him, which was quite unusual because he was a very distinctive-looking chap even then. He had a Mohican and a few tattoos already and piercings and things. He was very much an old-school punk, and he just walked up to me in a pub and said he knew me and he'd seen me around. He was a big, noisy, gregarious person. He was very noisy. Even if he himself wasn't being noisy, either his guitar, his keyboard, his drum kit, just any one of his instruments, he was being noisy on. And he was very outgoing, but like a lot of people that are very outgoing, he did have his own mental health problems. You know, he'd been on antidepressants since well before. He'd been on antidepressants since he was a child, well, a young adult. I mean, we were 30 when we met. And you know, he battled his demons, but you know, he wanted to, as a lot of men do it privately. But he still had a good time. You know, and he added and added and added to his collection of tattoos. He was eventually claiming he only had one tattoo, but they were just all joining together.
It was just one. It was joined up. He sounds larger than life, and he sounds like, I know you say he had a lot of mental health issues as well, but he sounds like a lovely guy. And you were together for 13 years before the accident. Is that right?
Yes, yeah. We got married relatively quickly. Yeah, we got married in just less than 3 years, and we would have celebrated our 10th wedding anniversary just a few months after he was killed. And it was purely the way it landed. It was Halloween. We got married on Halloween. I just phoned the registry office and I said, "When can you fit us in?" And they said the last Saturday of the month. And that just happened to be Halloween, but it was quite handy for an excuse for a party and a memorable wedding anniversary. So we were going to have a great big 10th wedding wedding anniversary, bedeck the entire house and things like that. But it didn't come to that, unfortunately.
So what happened? He was driving on a motorway,
Mm-hmm.
and what happened?
He had a minor bump with another motorist, just everyday occurrence, and they were where they were, very close to where we live. It was at Medwall in Sheffield. There was where they had the minor bump. There was a great big sign saying "No hard shoulder" for 4 miles. So that's the only information they had, that there was no hard shoulder for 4 miles. It didn't say but this is a new type of motorway and there's refuge areas every 1 to 2 miles. So there's a refuge area a mile out of sight. So they didn't know that. We didn't know what smart motorways were. We didn't know what dynamic smart motorways were, what all lane running smart motorways were. So all the information they had was there was no hard shoulder for 4 miles. But it is your legal obligation to stop after an accident. You know, he was in his brand new company car. It had literally been delivered 2 days before. The other person, obviously, who he'd never met before, was in a white transit van, turned out to be a delivery driver. So all they could do is stop where they could. But the crash barrier stopped them getting their vehicles out of the live running lane, and they themselves couldn't get over the crash barrier because there's a 30-foot drop onto a slip road below. So again, we didn't know what these types of roads were. I'd never heard of one. We went along that road every single day to work. Normally I would have been with him, but for a few different reasons that particular day, he kissed me goodbye at 8 o'clock and was dead by 8:10. And so they were stood on the live running lane next to their vehicles, and people were manoeuvring around them, but people in smaller vehicles, cars and vans, were managing to manoeuvre around them. But bigger vehicles, it's almost always a HGV that hits a stranded vehicle on a smart motorway because they can't manoeuvre as quickly, because physics doesn't allow 40 tons to stop as quickly, and the vehicle couldn't stop in time, and it ploughed into them and killed them.
When you say the vehicle, it was an HGV, a lorry that hit them, means it hit Jason and the guy from the other car as well.
Yes, yeah, he was a 22-year-old called Alexandro, so he was half my husband's age. And yeah, that's another thing that happens in these incidents. What people don't realise is all these incidents that keep happening on smart motorways, almost every time the people are not in their vehicle. So the HGV hit Jason and Alexandro. It did hit their vehicles as well, but it hit them bodily. And not only has a loved one just been ripped out your life, but it's been done in a most horrific manner, and you have to deal with the after effects of that, because you've got to you have to identify the body, you have to bury that person. And Alexandria's family had religious beliefs that they wanted to fulfill, and there was what I later found out is there'd been several deaths on that stretch, and the very previous death was an older Pakistani lady who had been killed, and again the vehicle hit her, and I'll not go into too many details, but it has the effect of a vehicle hitting a body, not a car. And religious beliefs come into that, and there was certain religious procedures that had to be performed because certain religions believe that the body must be buried whole, and there's actually procedures for this, and I never even knew that. That never even came into my world. You don't think you're going to get two police officers on your doorstep. You certainly don't think you're going to have to consider these routes, and what to do in these circumstances, and what route to go down.
Are you okay to carry on, Claire?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it sounds horrific. It sounds like it was just a bump and it became so much bigger because of what we understand is now a smart motorway. A smart motorway doesn't have a hard shoulder, is what you're saying.
There's 3 main types of smart motorway in England. One is just a normal motorway. It's just got extra cameras on it. Fine, no problem with that. The second type is dynamic, which means at busy times they turn the hard shoulder off and they use the hard shoulder as an extra lane. But that's confusing because under the highway code, you never cross a solid white line, except if you're on a dynamic smart motorway now. But how do you know when you're on 100 miles of motorway whether you're on a dynamic or not? The gantries don't work. The technology is not up to the job. And then there's ALR smart motorway, which is all lanes running. It means that it never has a hard shoulder. And again, obviously, in that circumstance, the technology, they said that they were removing the hard shoulder, but they've put all this technology in place to offset that danger. And the technology is just not ready. We get people from the control centres contacting us, pulling their hair out at their wit's end, saying, you don't know what we see every day. We're trying to stop this, but they won't listen. And it's just happening time and time and time again.
What's the understanding around it? Why have a smart motorway without a hard shoulder? What's the reason for it?
Officially, the reason is to increase capacity. Unofficially, the reason is to increase capacity on the cheap. But they started these 10, 15 years ago. The first one was bought in to, 10, 15 years ago. And they didn't tell anyone. They've never mentioned them. We don't know what they are now. So we certainly didn't then. And they just did it on the quiet because you can't object to what you don't know about. And then they've just slowly sneaked it out and sneaked it out and sneaked it out, and then people started to become aware of it. I still wasn't aware until Jason was killed on one, but there was people in the background that have been fighting this, and they've done National Highways is a privatised department of the government's Department for Transport. It's all very complicated, but they're a privatised department of the government, and they have been purposely keeping this quiet so you can't object to what you don't know about, because they just want to carry on with it. And there's massive private contracts involved in this. There's £180 billion contracts handed out to convert that bit to smart motorway and convert that bit to smart motorway. But when I was at school, I'm not an eco warrior. I wish I was, but I'm not. I just haven't actually sat down and looked at the big picture. But when I was at school 30 years ago, we knew we had a climate problem. So why are we increasing the motorways anyway now, 30 years down the line, 30 years after we started using pump action hairspray to save a little bit of the ozone layer? Now we're converting the entire country's motorways to expand them. But then, since then, we've had a pandemic that obviously massively affected the way we work. So there's far less people commuting. We should never have been expanding the motorways anyway, and now it really shouldn't. So why are we continuing to press ahead with it? And it's killing people. It's just killing people everywhere. And you don't realise, because even now, when there's a report of a big accident, they don't always say whether it was a smart motorway or not, because not everyone's sure. It's not easy to find out. I happen to have a map that National Highways had to produce, and I have to look up and see if that section was smart motorway or not. And not everyone's got that map.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because you wouldn't have known what a smart motorway was until you were tragically affected by it, right? And
Yeah.
so it's only now that you're campaigning. I want to take you back to that day when Jason died.
Mm-hmm.
You said you had two policemen on your door. What happened after that? How quickly did you start looking at smart motorways? What was your grieving like? How long before you suddenly thought, I have to do something about this?
It took a couple of weeks, because at first I was not on this planet. I couldn't cope with it. When they told me, I phoned the police, because the crash was paralysing the entire area. And I phoned the police and I said, I think my husband's in that crash. And they asked for his registration number. I'd seen photos on Facebook of the crash, but because it was a brand new car, my brain didn't register, and I was looking at a different car. So luckily I didn't realise that was my husband's car when I saw it. But I just kept hearing about this crash, and he wasn't messaging me. He messaged me all the time. It was this big, pierced, tattooed, scary looking thing, and he was a teddy bear, and he just messaged me all the time. And he wasn't messaging me, he wasn't replying, and so I phoned the police and I said I thought he was in that crash. So I had some inkling of what was coming. But they obviously saw that the officers were already on the way to me and thought it was better for me to learn face to face than on the phone. And they said, we need to put this through the system and ring you back. And so I opened the door to two officers and I just said, is he alive? And they said, let's go in. And I said, is he alive? And they said, let's go in. And I said, is he alive? And they said, no, unfortunately. And when they came in, they had body cameras, and I can just see myself. I can still see it now. It's not true. It's not true. It's not true. I was just rocking back and forward. I stood up, rocking back and forward, saying it's not true. And I couldn't take it in. And they're very trained at their jobs. They put a coat on me. They went around the house, closed windows, saw a nomad of tablets and said, are these yours? And I said, yes. So they put them in my pocket. I think I must have mentioned them that my mum only lived up the road. So they just put a coat around me, put me in the car and took me up to my mum's. And they told us a little bit about what had happened, but they didn't tell me that Jason wasn't in the car. They didn't tell me it was a smart motorway. None of that. It only came out. I didn't even know Jason wasn't in the car for 4 days. It was only when my liaison officer just said, I said, was it quick? And he said, yes, he was stood there 1 minute and gone the next. And, it was just so much to take in. They handed me his wedding ring, and where's my husband gone? I've got a ring. I had a husband at 8 o'clock and he was gone by 10 past. And I just couldn't take it in, and I wasn't capable of functioning. I couldn't eat, which was my favourite pastime up to then. I'm type 2 diabetic. I've got other illnesses, and my mum didn't get to grieve herself. Next to me, she was the next closest to Jason, and she didn't get to grieve herself. She was too busy looking after me. So she'd just put a little thing of cherry tomatoes in front of me, and she knew that I'd pick one or two, and it's better than nothing, isn't it? But I did go back to work after a week, and at first that helped, but then after a week it stopped helping. So I came home and I just went to bed for 2 weeks. I'd get up in the middle of the night, have something to eat, have my tablets, and go back to bed for 20 hours. I just wasn't capable of functioning. But then, little by little, I just kept hearing bits about. I thought it was just a tragic accident. But then my sister walked through the door at my mum's, and she didn't know I was in earshot. And I won't repeat her exact words, but she said it was one of those effing smart motorways. And I've never even heard of one. So for somebody else to say it was one of them, she obviously knows about this. I've never even heard of it. I don't drive. And she said it was one of those smart motorways. And I just thought, well, this is obviously something that people know about and don't like if they do know about them. And little by little, I as I got stronger, I'd sit up at my laptop and I'd Google it, and I just found that there was one group already on Facebook against them, Say No to Smart Motorways. But unfortunately, there wasn't much of an action plan. They just suggested you write to your MP. And I was a bit rude, and I said, my husband's just been killed. I want to do more than write a letter of complaint. And the more that we looked into it, my twin sister helped me, my older brother and sister and mum helped me. And the more we looked into it, the more there was so much hate for them. But there was a little bit here and a little bit there and a little bit there. There was no one centralised voice. So my sister knocked up this website virtually overnight and a Facebook page called Smart Motorways Kill. And we just went from there. And as soon as we started, people grabbed it with both hands. And now...
So what... Yeah.
Go on, sorry. And now, whenever there's a story in the media about smart motorways, my phone just goes absolutely mental. The entire country's media just ring me now because we've got one centralised voice on it, and we've got a lot of people that know their stuff now.
Which is great, because it sounds like you say it was very disparate, and then you brought it together. What is your remit as Smart Motorways Kill? What's the aim? What's the plan? What are you looking to achieve?
We have a one bullet point agenda, and we were criticised for that. That was a criticism that I received. You need to broaden your aims. You're asking for the impossible. You have a one bullet point manifesto, because all we want is the hard shoulder back on every single smart motorway. I don't want to compromise. I don't want to network. I don't want to, see this improved or see that improved. I want the hard shoulder back on every single smart motorway, because the technology is not up to it. It can't offset the danger. Motorways are dangerous enough, so don't make them more dangerous.
Is that realistic given the infrastructure in the UK with the roads? I don't know. I'm asking you, is that realistic to put in a hard shoulder on every motorway?
They're already there. They were there. They took them off. All you have to do, from what I understand, there is just 8 control centres in the country. So all you would need to do is press a switch over in 8 control centres, and they turn the hard shoulder back on, because it was already there. The hard shoulder is there. Now it's not a hard shoulder. It's lane 1. It used to be hard shoulder, lane 1, lane 2, lane 3. Now, no hard shoulder, lane 1, lane 2, lane 3, lane 4. So, the hard shoulder's already there. We just don't use it for what it's meant to be. So all you need to do is turn the crosses over each lane. And yes. You just need to put the cross above that lane, and you've got your hard shoulder back. It's 8 switches around the entire country, and we would have the hard shoulder back. And yes, they've spent an awful lot of money converting it, but people are dying. How much was my husband worth? there's some, I don't really understand it, but there's some governmental fiscal calculation that the average life is worth £2 billion. Well, there was 4 billion people worth of person killed in my husband's accident. Then there was, you know, another woman killed previously. Then there was a gentleman killed previously on that stretch. So, you know, you've got 8 billion just on that stretch in 3 years. What about all the other deaths around the country? And you shouldn't have to go through this. I shouldn't have to fight. And unfortunately for the government, then they haven't come across somebody that grew up in the family that I did. My family always fought for change. They were political protesters before it was known what political protesters were. So they killed the wrong person. But then, you know, due to circumstances, I was able to give up my job. I had a career in engineering, and I was able to give up my job, and I now campaign full time, and I'm just at the government constantly in every single way, shape and form. I've got so many different legal challenges going on. I have to write them down because I can't remember them all. I've got Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, a website, and it does get to people and it gets it out there. And every single time there's a story in the news about smart motorways, it's my face that's like, I'm getting sick of seeing my face. So I'm hoping that Grant Shapps just at some point says, please just give her what she wants, so she shuts up and goes away.
But it begs the question, right? How many people have to die before they, as you say, do these 8 switches? I mean, I can't believe it's as simple as technology.
Yeah.
I thought, is it building a hard shoulder on top of a motorway? But you're saying it's just a case of changing the use of infrastructure that's already there.
Yeah, the hard shoulder was there. They just took it away because they've convinced themselves we need to increase capacity. Why are we increasing the size of the motorways in this day and age? We should be doing everything but. But unfortunately, though, being a campaigner took over from being a widow. And for a while, I was both. But then I think I've got hardened to it now, and I would be very embarrassed. Well, not embarrassed, but I'd think twice before calling myself a widow now, because it's been 3 years, and you almost feel like, is there a point at which it wears off? And you know,
I don't. I can speak from my point of view. 6 years on, I don't think it wears off, it just changes. But I think it's different for everyone. And you've said something really interesting, Claire. You said that the campaigner took over from the widow. Do you feel like and I don't believe I fully grieve Jeremy and ever will, right? 6 years on, it just changes. Do you feel you've grieved Jason, or do you think you've just gone from widow very quickly to campaigner?
No, I've not grieved him properly at all. I was too scared. I couldn't let myself think about the bigger picture at first. I have done interviews, I've been on shows, I've been everywhere and talked about the campaign. I have never given a speech about Jason. I couldn't face a funeral. We had what's called a simple cremation, and he was cremated in the early hours of the morning on his own at a crematorium. No one attended. And I just went and collected his ashes later because I couldn't cope with that. There was no way on this earth that I could cope with that. But we've done silly things to remember him. He said the only time we ever discussed it, he said he wanted a Viking longboat funeral. But I discovered that Viking longboat funerals are illegal in this country. So we couldn't do that. But on the year anniversary, I went out and I bought loads of models of Viking longboats, and we sailed them down the canal. We set fire to them and sailed them down the canal. And because he didn't have a funeral as such, we had like a wake, but we had a music festival because he was really into his music. And whenever he went to a festival or a gig, he bought T-shirts. The man had 250 band T-shirts. I had to go out and buy 4 of them clothes rails, 20 packs of coat hangers, and hang them up and take a picture for people to believe. And then at the festival, we sold them. I was on the microphone. It was the first time I took a microphone and people couldn't believe it. And I was just like, come on, you're all his mates. You all like the same bands that he does. I want a tenner for this T-shirt. And we raised a lot of money and we gave it to the local men's. It's a men's charity. It's called Men Actively Talking Together. Because if I'd known it existed when Jason was alive, I would have made him go to it. So
it's men talking about mental health, is it?
Yeah.
And just getting stuff out there.
Yeah, so we gave the proceeds to them and we had the music festival, and I laughed and danced through my husband's wake, but I just couldn't face talking about him and what we'd lost, and you know, so I've never, in all this, in 3 years of campaigning, I have never given a speech about Jason, about what we lost, what he did, what he loved. I can give snapshots and things, and as you can see, I'm a bit hardened to it now. I just click it out like that. And at first, my family were worried that it was re-traumatizing me every time, because especially at first, everybody wanted to know exactly what happened, why he ended up in the situation he did, why he stopped where he did, because he did make an error of judgment. And the judge and the trial and the coroner at the inquest said it was an unwise decision to stop where he did. But the penalty for an unwise decision is not a horrific death.
No,
especially
it's not
on something
death.
we weren't educated on. But
No.
yeah, it went from, I very quickly went from widow to campaigner. But even now, even once in a while now, recently I did an interview for Good Morning Britain, and I've done the same interview 30, 40 times this year, but I don't know what it was. They used a lot more new photos, and they were just coming at me. I had my laptop up here. It's a widescreen laptop. And while they were talking, there was just picture after picture after picture, and I just burst into tears on
Yeah.
silly.
You would. You would. I mean, I'm not surprised. It's very difficult. What successes have you achieved, would you say, in your campaigning to date?
The most that we've achieved so far, the biggest thing that we've achieved so far, is educating the whole country on what a smart motorway is, because the government weren't going to do it. The government were actively not doing it. So at least we have told most of the country what one is, and they know to be cautious. They know because people think you still stay in your car, and disabled people are meant to. I mean, you are not allowed to discriminate. As an average member of the public, me and you are not allowed to discriminate against disabled people. But the government has discriminated against disabled people on an absolutely massive level. They're meant to stay in their car and put their hazards on. That's brace for impact. Because they can't get out of the vehicle and over the barrier, they're meant to stay put and hold tight. And how is that allowed? Why give them access to a shop? Just tell them to shout and we'll come out and serve them in the street if we're going to leave them in the road to die. So I don't understand.
I can see you're really passionate about this, having, of course, lost Jason. And I have to say, I think you're talking about it is going to save other lives, because I didn't know what a smart motorway is. I'm going to think twice about stopping it on what's not a hard shoulder. So I think your campaigning will have achieved that. I'm going to ask you something that you have said, that you haven't grieved Jason properly. If tomorrow the government says we're turning on those 8 switches and now you're done and now you have time, do you think you will grieve Jason? How will you grieve him?
I know it's going to hurt. I am not looking. Obviously, that's what I want, and we will achieve it, because I'm going to the High Court. But I'm hoping they give in before we get to the High Court, because if we get to the High Court, no sane person is going to approve this. So I am convinced. I may have to keep banging on for another 3 years, another 10 years. But I will win eventually. But I know, I'm starting to realise now, 3 years down the line, I am going to win at some point, and the campaign is going to stop, and I'm not looking forward to that, because
it's going to be bittersweet, isn't it? Because all your efforts are going into this. You want it to happen, but when it happens, everything you've been fighting for, in a way, it feels a bit like it's diversion as well.
Yeah. Oh yeah, definitely. It's deflection. I've always said it's deflection, and it's, as anybody will know that's been widowed, it affects your health. Even if you're ignoring it, even if you're deflecting, it affects your health. I've been in hospital twice in the last week, and it does affect you. And it's, I think it will completely pull the rug from under me, and I don't know what I'll do. But until that point, I'm going to keep fighting.
What do you think Jason would say to you at this point? Because in a way, you're doing it in his memory for sure. I mean, when you achieve this, it's going to be a huge win for you, but it's also going to be huge for his memory. Knowing what he was like, what do you think he'd say to you right now?
He would say something to me that he used to say to me when he was alive. Will you sit down and keep still for 5 minutes? Because it is constant, and unfortunately social media is massive in this, and it makes campaigning so much easier because you can reach thousands of people at the, just at the keyboard, but it's everywhere. When I'm out with my friends, I didn't go out for ages. I didn't drink alcohol for 2 years. I didn't trust myself, but just as the pandemic started to end, I started going out with my friends. I've got my phone in my hand, and I can see the comments coming in, and I can see the emails. They can reach. I've got a smartwatch. I can be in the bath, and I can see the emails coming in. It is just 24/7, and you can't put it down, and it is exhausting. It's absolutely exhausting.
You went from he died in June 2019, and then we went into COVID pretty much the beginning of 2020, and England went into a huge lockdown. Were you on your own in the house the whole time?
I was in a bubble with my mum, who lives up the road, and she's widowed. So we were in a bubble. We lived in separate houses, but we were allowed to meet. And that was very good. And we were already very close. And then I'd been widowed at the age of 43, which is still reasonably unusual. So we were close anyway. But like I always say, I was on a weird planet to start with being widowed. And then the rest of the country joined me in this weird planet. Everybody got thrown into this weird planet. But, luckily I was in a bubble with my mum, and we were able to keep each other. We were in walking distance of each other because we don't drive, neither of us. And, we kept each other company a lot. And we still do now. We still see each other virtually every single day. And it's made our relationship a lot closer, but it shouldn't have taken Jason's death. And I know some of what it did to Alexandru's family. I mean, they were originally from Romania, and his sister asked him to come over here because she was having a good quality of life, and she asked him to come over here and join her only 6 months before, and then he was killed on something that even we don't understand. If we don't understand how to use these roads, how are foreign drivers meant to? And our roads are dedicated trunk roads, so that we are encouraging foreign drivers to use our roads. But if we don't know how to use them, how are they meant to know how to use them?
You talk about this lorry going into Alexandra and Jason. How did you have any contact with the driver after, and have you forgiven him?
He does. I don't believe that he needs my forgiveness. I asked right from the early on to be put in contact with him, but because there was a criminal case going on, that wasn't allowed. But then at the court date, he was just he arrived himself under his own steam. He wasn't on remand or anything. He turned up to court and just had to stand outside the courtroom with us. There was 20 members of my family and him on his own because COVID restrictions were still in. So he had no one with him, and there was 20 members of my family just stood in the same hallway with him. If it meant him any harm, we could have hurt him before anybody could have got to him. But that's not the way that that we were thinking. Some members of my family are not quite 100% the same as me on it, but my mind was there was so much hurt in this, so much hurt, so many people really hurt, and there was nothing anybody could do about it. So the only thing we could do was just make it easier where we could. And he was just stood there. He was sat there just looking down. He didn't dare lift his head. So I just walked over to him and I took his hand and I said to him, "You didn't mean to do this. You shouldn't be here." And he just took my hand back and he said, "I'm more scared of looking in your eyes than I am of anything the judge can do to me." And, we had journalists and everything around us because it was getting a lot of attention, but luckily they weren't allowed their cameras in. So I didn't want anybody filming this. This wasn't for the cameras, And I just said, this wasn't your fault, because apparently at the scene he'd stood there and said, "I am a murderer."
Oh, gosh.
So,
yeah.
And then afterwards I asked to be put in contact with him, but it's run by a charity, and I knew more about where he was than they did. But eventually he got out because he was jailed, and I didn't believe should have been jailed, and I asked to say that, but I was told that you can't tell a judge what to do, and that if I did, I could be arrested for contempt of court. Which, looking back now, I know that's not right. I've seen cases where people have said, "Don't jail the person," but then it was explained to me that if they didn't blame the driver, then they'll have to blame the road. So, I mean, there was a lot done at the court that I really don't agree with. I was really railroaded by the public defence. But if there'd been a hard shoulder, Jason would have been in one lane and the driver would have been in another lane, and there would have been no issue at all. So I never believed that he should be jailed. So afterwards, I just got in contact with him myself, and we talked for a very, very long time one night, and he explained a lot to me. I mean, he's a foreign national. He's been here a long time, but he's a foreign national, and I'm not entirely sure what like his NHS status and things is. But I asked him if he'd had counselling, and he said no, he'd gone to a priest. Well, that just floored me. You know, a 30-year-old guy having to go to a priest to just get any relief. It just, like, you know, that made me cry.
Yeah. I got quite emotional when you discussed meeting him, because your compassion for him is huge, and there are not many people. I can see the logical. Okay, I can see that the logical was he couldn't do anything, but he still hit your husband. So your compassion is really, for me, is mind-blowing. And did it help in what grieving you've done to date, do you think?
Yes, definitely, because it helped him immensely. He told me that. So to have helped someone, you know, in all this hurt. Jason was dead. There was nothing we could do about that. Alexandra was dead. Nothing we could do about that. The one person in that was there at the time that was still alive, there was something we could do for him. And he said it helped. And at that, I'm not a soppy, huggy person. I'm not really. But helping, being kind. I know it sounds like a Facebook meme, but being kind helped. It did help. But as I got stronger, I got bullshit again. So then I started shouting at the government.
But you were shouting at the people that you felt were responsible,
Yeah,
not
exactly.
the person who actually. How long was he in prison for?
He was a sentence of 10 months was passed, but I think it was 5 months that he served. But because he was a foreign national that got a jail sentence, he's automatically earmarked for potential deportation. And one night I just got an email saying he's been moved to this prison, which is a holding prison for deportation. And so I just emailed the Home Office, Grant Shapps, Department for Transport, absolutely everybody I had an email for. And I said, if you want me to start a second campaign, I will do it. And 2 days later, he was back in his normal prison.
They were like, we really don't want to start Claire off in another tangent.
Exactly.
I love it. It's great. What are the next steps for the campaign then?
Pushing a lot more, because we've come to the Department for Transport have tried ignoring our legal action, but even they have exhausted the amount of time they can ignore us for. Legally, you can't just ignore a legal action. Not everybody would do it. We served them with papers and they just ignored us, but they can only ignore us for so long. So they're now meeting with my lawyers, but they're discussing compromises, they're discussing action plans, they're discussing ways forward. And I said, there's only one thing that's going to make me shut up and go away. And until you accept that, we're not getting anywhere. And we're just going round and round and round in circles. But unfortunately, while that's happening, people are still dying. I mean, all 4 lanes of the motorway were closed today where Jason was killed. Today, because of an incident. All 4 lanes. So it's just happening again, just constantly. And then in the next couple of weeks, sorry, I'm just going to take a drink. In the next couple of weeks is the inquest of the Pakistani lady that I mentioned, Nargis Begum. And that is going to be a big thing, because the coroner has got her teeth into that. She is adamant that she's going to prove that this is not just as simple as just a car crash. And she's hauling the government over the coals. So that's going to be early September, and that's going to generate a lot of interest, which just means we all get bombarded by the country's media again.
By the media. Yeah. But that's okay, because it's still raising awareness. I'm curious to know, Claire, if somebody else wanted to start a campaign for whatever they want to do, another widow were to start a campaign for their partner, not the same campaign, a different one. Where do you start? What's the first thing you do?
social media, a media presence. Just get absolutely everywhere. And I mean, I don't even know how to use Instagram. I had to wait for you to invite me. I've got a button. I've got a button on my phone that sends the same picture. I upload a picture to Facebook. I upload a picture to Twitter, and then I've just got a button on my phone that uploads the same picture to Instagram. I do not know how to work Instagram. And as for TikTok and Vine and all the rest of them, I'm 46 now. I'm getting left behind. But just get absolutely everywhere. And while it's great that the entire country's media come to me, I do prefer it when they interview other people as well, and I encourage other people, because then it's just not me. Because at first I got dismissed as a hysterical widow who didn't accept her husband's death, but then when you show that it's happened, that the lack of hard shoulder has directly attributed to over, what did they get the figure to now? I think it's 73 deaths in the last 5 years alone that we know of. And that is directly just because of the hard shoulder. That's not including when the technology doesn't work, because the technology doesn't work. If you stop if your car just stops, and new cars do stop, you go to the recall list on the government website. There's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of cars sold this year that have got recall faults. And because they're computers, when they glitch, they just stop. So you could just come to a stop in the third lane of a motorway. And you have got, from the time it takes the vehicle behind you to reach you, to get out of danger. So you've got 2 seconds, and they reckon closing the lane and letting everyone know to get out of the way is the solution, and it's not, because if you've just passed the gantry, you can't see that lane's closed. And I can't remember the name, but there's a name for the effect where you can't tell that a vehicle is not moving. It's similar to the stroboscopic effect. I can't remember what it's called, but you can't tell the vehicle's not moving. And people just don't realise. And also your reaction times, you haven't got the reaction time. If you're all doing 70, you've got 2 seconds. And they reckon that closing the lane and getting a crew out to you, the average time to getting a crew out to you is 17 minutes. If you're in lane 3 of a motorway and everyone's doing 70 miles an hour. So, but yes, anyway, the answer is get everywhere, be noisy and be human. Because at first I tried to be professional and I tried to be, all organised about it. And then little by little my cover slipped. And I don't swear, but I need to check my spelling more according to my mother. But, I'll just put, in response to yet another report, I'll just post it and put utter rubbish. My sister will write a really detailed breakdown of it, and she'll do pages and pages of notes. And I'll post that, but first I'll put utter rubbish. Complete rubbish. I do moderate what I want to put, but being human makes a big difference. And I think
it does. I think it's authentic, isn't it? It's authentic.
Exactly, yeah. And I think the look confused a few people at first, because at first I had a shaved head. And my tattoos weren't quite finished and things like that, and I was a lot bigger. I put on a lot of weight very quickly, then lost weight, and then put on weight, and then lost weight, and I think people thought, I'm not sure what's going on there, I'm not sure, but then I think they've got used to it now. And red hair or brightly coloured hair, because even when they can't remember my name and exactly what I'm campaigning about, I always get, it's that last bit red hair.
They won't forget that in a hurry. I'm sure they won't forget you in a hurry, Claire. You're so inspiring, and you're doing so much. And I think this isn't just for Jason. I know Jason's death has sparked it off, but it feels like it's for every driver in England, really, and in the UK. We've got some comments. Orlando says, the horror of things you learn after something like this. I'm so sorry. It's so true, isn't it? It took Jason's death for you to know that something like smart motorways, which is taking so many deaths. You've got a comment here which says embezzlement is why they keep them. I think that was when we were talking about hard shoulders.
Yeah, it's the massive contracts, the absolutely massive figures involved in the contract. Because what happens is the government hands out these contracts to the big private contractors, and then they support the political party. So they basically donate to the party. So then they've got them, over a barrel, because they'll say, well, if you don't keep handing out these contracts, we won't keep supporting you.
Yeah. So it's all to do with money at the end of the day. It's all to do with money. Claire, thank you so much. I think as a parting, is there anything you want to say that we haven't
No,
covered?
no.
Okay, so as a parting comment, I'd just like you to say, how do you want people to remember Jason?
Big, smiley, tattooed, unusual, loving teddy bear.
He sounded like he sounds like he was a fabulous guy. So I'm so sorry for your loss, but I think you'll be doing him proud. And I can say on behalf of all the drivers in the UK, thank you for what you're doing. You're making the roads safer, and there's not many people doing that. So thank you.
Thank you.
Claire, thank you so much for sharing your story today and telling us how can people reach you? What's your handle on Instagram and Twitter?
Smart Motorways Kill on all
Okay.
of them. The website, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Smart Motorways Kill.
Okay, Smart Motorways Kill. Please do follow Claire and watch how she progresses. And I'm sure that when everything changes, that button is switched, we'll hear all about it, Claire. So thank you so much. Do tune in next week on Tuesday at 8 o'clock when Emma will be talking to Scotty's Little Soldiers founder, Nikki Scott. And I'm sure that's going to be a fascinating conversation. And don't forget that you can catch up with this conversation and all Instagram live for the 25 Tuesdays on our Instagram videos and also Ways YouTube videos. I do want to tell you that I will be back on the 23rd of August. I'm interviewing Stacey Heal, so I'm looking forward to talking to her then. But in the meantime, just want to say thanks very much to Claire. Please do follow me on @JustJoom, JustJoom. I'm a mindfulness and meditation teacher, and I do a lot of mindfulness and meditations on there. But I'll be back on the 23rd of August. See you then. Thanks very much, Claire. Until then, take care. Bye. Thanks, Claire.
Bye.